I know it's still February, but I'm writing this story because I can't wait for summer, and I strongly dislike the cold, windy winter weather. This story happened to me back in the summer of 2018, when I was transitioning into the 8th grade. I went to a sleepaway camp in the Appalachian Mountains. I considered it a second home for me. I didn't really have to worry about schoolwork, besides summer homework, and I made some of the greatest friends I had ever had there. This is one of my main reasons why summer is my favorite season. I got along with literally everyone at the camp, except this one person made me see how dangerous people can really be. That summer, there was a new counselor whose name was Art. He looked to be about in his 50s, due to his white hair and his slightly wrinkled skin. Being a camp counselor in your 50s does not seem right to me. I don't know about you guys, but it gives off pedophile vibes to me. When I and my bunk first met him, he seemed like a trustworthy person though. For the first week of camp, he helped us clean out our bunk when it was dirty and talked to us whenever we were feeling down. I and my bunk didn't have any problem with him from the start, but the girls around camp would talk behind Art's back. They would say something like, "He's a creepy old man that probably preys on children." After all, he is way older than all the other counselors, so I can see where they were coming from. One night, things got a little intense. We had a recess night where we got to do whatever we wanted to, and I and my fellow bunkmates played tennis with each other. During the game, Art would watch us the whole time. During that time, he would give off a big grin that looked like how Pennywise the Clown from It would grin. I actually thought this was creepy. Why was he smiling like that? Was he really who the girls say he is? Part of me thought he was just admiring how much fun we were all having. It didn't stop there though. Another night, when I came out of the shower, I saw a shaving cream bottle. Now, this is when I was starting to go through my puberty phases, but I didn't have any facial hair yet. I walked over to the bottle where it was on the bathroom sink, and I grabbed it and examined the whole thing. As soon as I did that, though, I felt tense hand grips touch my arms. I turned around to see who it was, and it was Art. His facial expression had such a strong demeanor. He then spoke. "Listen to me, you little cunt. I'm not gonna have you ever touch my belongings, you got that?" I didn't know what was going on because everything was happening so fast. I was really scared, so I just complied with, "Yes, good. You better not do it again, or else I'm going to kill you," he threatened. I then walked out of the bathroom with my bathrobe still on, and I was still shaking from what had just happened seconds ago. I was surprised to see no one else in the bunk had even heard the whole encounter. I didn't feel comfortable telling anyone about this. It was just embarrassing. Later, I was able to cool off, but from there, I will try my best to avoid Art as much as I can. It was now the end of the first week of camp, and one last thing happened that almost made me want to go home and never return to the camp. It was like a Tuesday or Wednesday night on the second week of camp, and I and my bunk were just heading back from movie night, which the camp decided to do that night. It was also Art's night off. This made me happy because I didn't feel safe around him, knowing that he threatened me days before. I got back to the cabin, and about 15 minutes inside the cabin, I heard someone screaming from a distance. There were definitely like 10 little girls screaming. This went on for another minute, and then it stopped. I and all my other bunkmates looked at each other in confusion as to what could possibly be going on out there. We had 3 counselors present with us that night, and 2 counselors told us to stay here as they were going to investigate what was happening, while the other counselor stayed with us. We all listened and stayed put. About an hour and a half passed, and our 2 counselors were still gone. Something major had to have happened. It was also time for lights out, and so the counselor who was still with us turned the lights off, and we were all in bed. I guess we would all find out what really happened the next morning. Morning time then came, and we were eating breakfast at the camp's dining hall. We were allowed to sit wherever we wanted to, so that's what we did. I sat down with a few of my bunkmates, and some other girls sat down with us. As we were eating, one of the girls finally told us the whole story of what happened last night. One of the younger girls' cabins heard some noises from their bedroom last night, while their counselors were outside talking to each other. The girls went to go see what the noise was, and when they reached the bottom stall where the noise was coming from, they opened the door, and they all saw the one and only 50-year-old counselor, Art, sitting on the toilet with his pants down, revealing his genitals. He then smiled and said, "Hey, pretty girls." That is when all the girls screamed and ran out of the cabin, which were the screams we heard. They ran so far deep into the woods while one of the 2 of their counselors followed behind. Art was still inside of the bathroom while 2 of their counselors remained at the cabin, and the other counselors, including 2 of mine, went inside. And they all saw him sitting on the toilet with his pants down. That's when 3 male counselors wrestled Art to the ground and held him down there. Another counselor then called for the camp police on his walkie-talkie and said everything that all went down. When the police arrived, Art was still down in the same position, and that's when he was taken away in the police car. He was still in custody that morning, and that young girl had to sleep in a couple of other girls' cabins because they were clearly not safe there. Everyone at my table just stopped eating, and all of our jaws were dropped. I'm sure every other table was talking about it as well. My heart went out to all the little girls who had seen true terror last night. I did one more summer after that summer at the sleepaway camp, and nothing that severe had happened again. Art obviously never returned again to the camp, and I wouldn't be too surprised if he is still being held in some sort of institution to keep him away from children. Monsters like him should be held in prison for a very long time, maybe even life. I hope he is getting all the hard time he deserves in prison, because child predators like him don't belong in this world. When I was younger, my friends and I loved exploring abandoned places around the country. We mostly did it for the thrill of seeing what places looked like years after being abandoned by the previous owners. One day, after school had ended, my friend Noah told me that he found an abandoned ranch outside of town. Noah, I, and one other guy, which I will be calling Tony for the sake of his privacy, planned to later go that afternoon, after it got dark, so that we wouldn't get spotted entering the ranch. To give some backstory, Tony has always been the type of person to destroy abandoned buildings, smashing the windows, graffiti, breaking down the doors, and so on. We never really paid it any mind, since the buildings we were exploring usually were completely ruined by the time we got there. When the sun started going down and the darkness rolled in, we drove towards the ranch and parked a few hundred feet away to ensure people wouldn't associate my car with us if we were spotted entering or leaving the property. In order to get onto the property, you had to climb a 7-foot fence that surrounded the entire thing. Tony had brought some wire cutters to cut it open in a section of the fence where it was mostly covered by the surrounding forest. After cutting a hole in the fence, we squished our way through to the other side. The first thing we saw was the big decaying house, which was 70 to 80 feet from our entry point. Next to the house was a small wooden barn that looked like it had been there for over 200 years. It was disturbingly creepy to look at. Although the house was a whole other story, all the windows on the ground floor were boarded up, and the windows on the second floor were all broken. Vines were growing on the inside of the building, almost absorbing the house. The main door was also boarded up and nailed shut, so we couldn't enter through it. Noah motioned us over to the side of the house. A window wasn't boarded up down at the ground. It looked like it led to a basement of some sorts. Tony grabbed a rock and smashed the window to pieces and proceeded to crawl into the house. Both I and Noah looked at each other with uncertainty, but decided to follow Tony down into the house. The first thing we noticed was the smell. I won't say the cliche, it smells like a dead body, but the stench was almost unbearable. It smelled like a combination of rotting flesh and spoiled milk. There was next to no light in there, the only light being the light from the moon shining through the broken window. We found a staircase leading upstairs. Every step made a deep and heavy creak. The staircase led us straight into the living room. Most of the furniture in there looked old and destroyed. There was a big sofa in the middle of the room, the type of sofa that is placed on stilts, and next to it was the staircase leading up to the second floor. The house was very dark since all the windows on the ground floor were boarded up. We were slowly making our way around the room, exploring. The house had a weird feeling to it. It almost felt like someone was still living there. Black and white pictures were hung up on the walls, most of them of a family we assumed was the previous owners. The weirdest part of the pictures was that in all of the pictures, no one was smiling. They were all just staring at the camera with a blank expression. While Tony and I were looking at the pictures, Noah was wandering around in the dark. I guess he didn't watch his step because the next thing we knew, a glass object was knocked over and it shattered on the floor. The sound was heart-wrenching. We all froze as a glass shard slowly settled on the floor. Not even 5 seconds later, my worst nightmare came true. The hair on the back of my neck stood up instantly when we started hearing footsteps upstairs, right above our heads. We all looked at each other. I've never seen Noah and Tony so visibly scared before. I could feel the panic setting in. I grabbed Noah and Tony and shoved them towards the sofa. We crawled under it, trying to hide. We couldn't all fit under it though. There was only enough space for 2 people, so Tony had to hide somewhere else. There was a tall cupboard to the left of the staircase leading to the 2nd floor. He opened it and squished himself inside. The footsteps were at the top of the staircase and slowly coming down. Noah and I were lying head to head under the sofa. His breathing was so loud that he was hyperventilating. I placed my hand over his mouth to try to make him quiet down. The creaks of the wooden floor as the footsteps reached the bottom of the staircase were a sound of pure horror. My blood ran cold as the footsteps slowly made it from the staircase and over to the sofa and then stopped. The silence was almost deafening. You never truly understand the meaning of that until you've experienced it for yourself. It was just pure silence for what felt like a minute. Then the worst scream I've ever heard broke the silence as Noah was dragged from under the sofa. His scream almost set me into a state of shock. While I was trying to get up from under the sofa, when I got up, I saw who pulled him away. It was a man with a disheveled-looking beard. I could barely make out any other details due to the lack of light. Noah was being pulled upstairs by the man. Tony also crawled out of the cupboard as Noah was screaming for help. I grabbed a shard of the broken glass on the floor, ran up the stairs, and stabbed it into the man's arm. He screamed out in pain as he let go of Noah. We all ran downstairs into the basement to try to escape the house. The window leading out from the basement was too high up though, so we had to push each other up. Tony and I pushed Noah up out the window, and then I helped Tony get up. The second Tony crawled out, I heard footsteps rushing down the staircase to the basement behind me. I jumped up and grabbed Tony's hand. The wall in the basement was wet and slippery, making it hard to get up. I screamed for Tony to pull me up as I heard water splashing behind me. The man was running across the basement straight towards me. I was halfway through the window when I felt a hand grabbing my ankle. I've never felt such fear as the man started to pull me back into the basement. I kicked back as hard as I could, hitting the man in the face. He finally let go of my ankle and I crawled out of the basement. We ran across the ranch and out towards the hole in the fence. Before we left, I looked back up towards the house and in the upstairs window, I could see the man standing there, looking down at us. We ran out of there and over to where I parked my car, jumped in and sped off. It's been over 6 years since this happened and we've never gone back. Sometimes we sit and wonder, why was someone living in a boarded up and abandoned ranch? And what was he going to try and do to us? I used to be a police officer in Seattle, Washington. If I'm being real here, I never really liked my job. I never wanted to become one. I only became one because I never got into any colleges of my choice, and I decided that being a police officer would be a good backup option since I was athletic, was on a few high school sports teams, and I would go and still go to the gym every day. Every day when I worked as an officer, it would be the same as always, except for this one day. One day in October of 2019, when the coronavirus pandemic was still going on, I was sitting in my patrol car when a call came in about a guy who had a hammer in his hand and was yelling and swinging the hammer at another man in a park. It was said that civilians tried to intervene and stop the man, but they were unable to. That's when I decided that I would be the one who would respond to the 911 call, because I was close to where the park was at the time. As I was driving to the location, I got calls on the police radio that the man was now in an alley nearby to where the park was and had a flaming stick in his hand. I was driving slower now because the man could have been anywhere. Then I saw him come around a side corner with a stick on fire in his hand. I opened my door and yelled out from a distance, "Seattle Police Department, stop." Sadly, it was to no avail, and he cursed at me. What happened next is something I could have easily avoided. I drove my car forward and I did not remember to close my door. As I yelled at him to stop once again, he started running towards my car with the fire stick in his hands. And when he got to my car, he threw the stick inside. I immediately jumped to the passenger seat and started firing several shots at him, but none had hit him. I forgot to hit the brakes, so the car started going backwards. I then fell out of the seat and onto the outside of the ground. In a millisecond, I dispatched that shots were fired and that I needed medical help. After I did that, I ran away from the car because it was about to fully catch fire. Minutes later, other officers dispatched that they caught the guy, hit him with a stun gun, and they were taking him into custody. This made me feel so relieved. Medics then arrived, and I was transported to a nearby medical center. I was treated for my minor injuries to my left leg and both hands. While I was still there, I found out that the guy's name is Brian, and he was charged with assault. A week after the incident, I was placed on administrative leave, but in the end, I decided that I would resign because I thought that it would be the best for me. It's still not yet clear what started the argument between Brian and the man, but Brian had no right to attack him with such a heavy object. He's still waiting on trial, but I firmly believe that he will be found guilty of his actions. I had just recently graduated with an associate's degree in communications at a community college, and I was able to find a job in that field. I was also able to put the incident past me, but I will never forget the time I felt trapped inside my own car and barely made it out alive.